Salve Greece and Rome students. Thank you guys for coming back to continue on with chapter 11 today. I'm excited to see a few more emperors with you. We're getting into a pretty busy, chaotic time period of the Roman Empire as we get into the 3rd century, so that's kind of where we're headed. The last emperor we talked about in the previous day was Commodus, and he was the emperor who was the son of Marcus Aurelius. He kind of ended basically what we call the 5 good emperors. It's funny, we look back on it as this monumental thing. He ended the 5 good emperors. Of course, at the time, no one would know that they would be called the 5 good emperors and that Commodus would turn out to be worse and everything. But looking back, we kind of see it as very cut and dry and all the dynasties and everything. But Commodus did turn out to be a pretty bad emperor. We learned yesterday that he had these plans to rename Rome after himself and all sorts of things, and he eventually was assassinated for all of this. So we didn't talk about what came after Commodus, though. The big thing was there was no plans for succession after Commodus's death. He didn't have any grown children, or he hadn't adopted someone to pass the reins on to. Probably he thought he would rule for a number of more years, and that didn't work out. So basically, post-Commodus, things were pretty chaotic. Okay, I'm just going to move out of the way. Because again, there was no plan for succession. So we've seen a lot of times in Roman history, sometimes it just works out by blind luck, but a lot of times when there's no plan for succession, things do not work out well, and they're like with the year of the 4 emperors and all that chaos after Nero, right? So you have different bodies and elements of power wanting to have a hand in choosing the next emperor. For example, the Senate, of course, wants to have a vote who's going to be the next emperor. The Praetorian Guard has a big interest in who will be the next emperor, and the military is interested and wants to kind of choose the next emperor. So they're all kind of vying and fighting with themselves. The Senate moves first, and they claim one of their own, we call Pertinax, as the next emperor in 193. But he wasn't approved by the Praetorians. They didn't like him. He was killed even just later that year by the Praetorian Guard. So we don't know much about Pertinax because his reign was so short. Then the Praetorians said, we're going to take actions into our own hands, and they auctioned off the office of emperor, or princeps as we've called it. So this is a pretty remarkable thing. Whoever will pay us kind of the most bribe, basically, we will salute you and support you as emperor. So an auction literally occurred, and this was won by Marcus Didius Severus Julianus. We usually just call him Didius Julianus, and he had been the father-in-law of Pertinax. So he was supported by the Praetorians because he paid them a lot of money, but the army didn't have a say in that. So the armies declared their own emperors. So what are we leading to? We're leading towards civil war because you have multiple people thinking they're the emperor at the same time. So you have Didius Julianus, who doesn't do much in his reign, but his name does come up sometimes. For example, in Curtomund, just as being the only emperor to ever buy the emperorship. That's kind of his claim to fame. Different parts of the army claim their own emperors. For example, in Syria and some of the eastern provinces, their general called Gaius Pasquinius Niger was declared emperor. And up in Britain, you had Decimus Clodius Albinus declared emperor. And then, of course, around the Danube and the Rhine region, kind of in the northeast region, you had Lucius Septimius Severus. So at basically the same time, all of these men have their soldiers declaring them emperor. Now, why are the soldiers doing this? Nowadays, that would seem kind of crazy for the soldiers to, like if American soldiers just said, we don't like the president, here's who we choose as president, it seems almost unthinkable. But back then, it was not like now where we have this kind of separation between military power and political power, and it was just seen as more acceptable for soldiers to give their opinions. Also, they had a vested interest in their guy becoming emperor, because let's say you support him and you fight for him and then he becomes emperor, well, he's going to owe you, and he's going to owe you with remuneration and with paying you and giving you a good retirement and supporting you. So if your guy becomes emperor, you think that's going to be a great thing for you, right? Of all of these guys, the shrewdest, the most capable was Septimius Severus, and he was the first one to make a beeline for Rome, headed quickly to Rome to try to basically consolidate power and have himself confirmed as emperor. He also did something pretty smart from the outset. He made basically an ally of one of the other claimants of the emperorship. He appointed Albinus, who would also claim to be emperor, as Caesar. He gave him that title, which is almost like a co-emperor, Augustus being kind of the senior emperor, and Caesar being kind of a title for the junior, the next line emperor, the junior emperor. So basically, he did that to kind of pacify Albinus for a while, so he can focus his attentions elsewhere. Now, of course, Didius Julianus was still trying to rule in Rome, but the Praetorians, their loyalty eventually wavered. Maybe the bribes they had received was no longer going far enough for them. The Senate eventually sentenced him to death, and he was killed in June of 193. So he did not even hold on for power more than a couple months before being killed. So you can't just buy the emperorship; you have to have some actual support. Septimius Severus at that point entered Rome and was accepted as emperor, but of course you still have Gaius Pescennius Niger out there, whose soldiers are claiming him to be emperor. So we'll talk more about the reign of Septimius Severus, but he was seeming very politically astute, very good militarily, very smart, and so you can see his reign here, nearly 20 years, and he was someone we do look back on and said, he had a pretty calming influence, not calming, but a good stabilizing influence on Rome. Okay, some things he did to kind of solidify his power and set Rome up for success. Well, first he dismissed the Praetorian Guard because, what had they just done? They had just auctioned off the consulship, or not the emperorship, and then they killed the guy they sold it to within a few months, right? So Septimius Severus is thinking, I can't trust these guys if they're going to be my guards, if they're killing their own emperors, and so he dismisses them. He replaces them with his own legionaries, people who had already fought for him. He already trusted them, and he knew that they would be loyal to him. He stationed a legion of his own men 13 miles south of Rome. This was an unprecedented act of putting a legion permanently so close to Rome, basically on call if there were to be need for Septimius to call upon them. So that was, the Senate would not have been thrilled with that at all, having that kind of threat hanging over them. So he had to get rid of the other threat. So he marches east against Pescennius Niger. He sees the eastern city of Antioch, which we talked about before. It was probably the biggest city in Syria at the time. And so Niger was fleeing from Septimius Severus, and Niger was killed during some fighting while he was fleeing. Severus divided Syria into two provinces. Basically, if you've been keeping track, Syria, several generals have become prominent after serving in Syria and controlling Syria. You had Vespasian coming from there, and so it was looking like it was too powerful of a position to hold Syria for yourself. So he divided it to try to reduce the influence of one person controlling Syria. Maybe a smart thing. He stayed in the east some and campaigned against the Parthians from 194 to 199, not for 5 years straight, but for big parts of those 5 years, he campaigned against the Parthians. He was very successful against them, more than a lot of other emperors had been. He celebrated a triumph back in Rome, and they built a large arch to celebrate his triumph, and you can see it in the picture here. And this, we just call it the Arch of Septimius Severus, and it is one of the arches that still exists today. So you can walk up to it, and it's right in the middle of the Roman Forum, so you can't miss it when you're there. He was so effective against the Parthians that dynasty in Persia started to wane because of his success against them, and this gave rise to a new dynasty that we call the Sasanians, that we're going to talk about, of course, because they're still going to be kind of Rome's foe to the east, and the Sasanians actually proved to be more aggressive and even more trouble for the Romans than the Parthians had been. So it's kind of an interesting thing that he was almost too successful and brought on a more aggressive dynasty. Now, he still has Albinus out there, Clodius Albinus, who he had promoted to Caesar, but he does not want to share power with Septimius Severus. So once he's got Niger out of the way and the east is kind of calming down a little bit, he heads to Gaul, and he takes on Clodius Albinus and says, looking back, it makes Albinus kind of seem like a sucker, but you can kind of see his motivations. So they fight at the Battle of Lugdunum, which was in Gaul in 196 AD. And of course, Septimius Severus wins. He's much better militarily. And now he is kind of the sole emperor after eliminating all of his other claimants, obviously. He had his family adopted posthumously into the family of Marcus Aurelius. Again, that seems really odd today, to be adopted into someone's family after death. But remember, Commodus was very unpopular. So going back to Marcus Aurelius, he was the last really popular, loved emperor. And so he wanted to connect himself to the idea of Marcus Aurelius. So he had himself connected to that family literally by adoption. He also changed his son's name to include the name of a few of the five good emperors, Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Interesting, he chose the last two of the five good emperors, and kind of he wants to show that his family is connected to them, even though they were not related actually at all. He promoted his son Marcus Aurelius Antoninus to co-Augustus, in other words, co-ruling with him at the age of 11. Right. Now, from now on, we're going to call his son Caracalla because that's his more common nickname. He was given a nickname for this large cloak that he was said to have worn in the Navy, which kind of stuck, I guess. But Caracalla is his much more famous name. Now, Septimius Severus was popular with his soldiers. They loved him. He fought with them. He was a good general to them. He he was a soldier's soldier, and so they respected him. So the army was never something that was always his base of support. He did some things that were popular with the soldiers also to keep their support. He increased the number of legions up to 33 during his reign. He allowed soldiers to begin getting married while serving. If you remember, ever since the reign of Augustus, you were not allowed to get married while you served. You had to wait until after. And he gave them a huge pay boost. And again, this is a smart thing if you want to keep the soldiers on your side, which you need to do. But this also is going to become expensive to pay for because you can never really go back on it, right? Or else, if you're the one who cuts the soldiers' pay, they're not going to support you. So he had a good relationship with the army. They loved him. He was harsher to senators. He felt like he had the army shored up enough that he could be a little harsher to senators. He reduced their positions, reduced their influence over the government, and Equites did better under Septimius Severus because the senators' influence was waning. In general, he was popular with the people. Things were relatively stable. He ruled for almost 20 years, and he left a legacy of good government. And to show you how well the empire was run, he left the empire's treasury with a surplus at his death, which is kind of a remarkable thing because some emperors had been spendthrifts and had left them in debt at the end of their reign. So, pretty good emperor overall compared to a lot of the others. When he died, he was campaigning in Britain. He went there in 208 and was campaigning to basically extend Roman territory north until his death in 211, and he actually died in Britain. And so when he dies in 211, in comes his son, Caracalla, we mentioned. Now, they don't even bring this up in the book, and I don't know why not. Maybe they just don't have time to mention every little thing, but Septimius Severus actually left power to his two sons, Caracalla, and another one, a younger one called Geta, Geta. And they don't even mention this in the book, but he wanted them both to rule and basically to split up responsibilities and hoping it would be like a new dynasty. Caracalla, though, just within less than a year after that arrangement, after his father died, he grew weary of sharing power with his brother, and he had his brother Geta killed very early on in his reign. So it just kind of shows you a little bit about Caracalla's character, that he was capable of ruthless things like killing his brother. But for most of his reign, he was ruling alone since he killed his brother. Now, as far as being compared to his dad, Septimius Severus, he was less charismatic. He didn't just have that charismatic, ability that Septimius Severus had, and more brutal. Again, killing your brother, more brutal than his father. His father had given him some advice on his deathbed to actually both the brothers. He had told them, if you do anything, don't neglect the troops. The troops are the key to keeping the emperorship, to keeping the empire. Don't neglect the troops. Keep them above anything else. And so Caracalla actually did pay heed to that. He didn't do everything well at all, but he did pay heed to that, and he actually gave them a raise when he became emperor beyond what his father had done, which was already a big raise. So Caracalla was able to keep the support of the soldiers. That's why you can see he held on to power for a while. He also instituted the Constitutio Antoniniana, which was a decree that did a few things, but the biggest one was it granted citizenship to all free inhabitants of the empire. It seems like a little footnote, but it's actually kind of a big deal. If you remember, we've seen wars fought over Roman citizenship whenever Rome was kind of stingy with who became a Roman citizen and whatnot, and we had the social war that erupted because Rome wouldn't give citizenship to their Italian allies, and so now you have citizenship being given out much more widely. He might have done this as a way to bring in more tax revenue. There might be some other things, but this was probably not a thing just to be nice. There was probably some reasons why this would have helped Caracalla. He was under attack a lot during his reign. Caracalla spent most of his time outside of Rome fighting, and he just was not popular. His popularity with the army stayed for a while because he promoted them and he was paid them more, etc. But eventually he was assassinated in 217 at Carrhae in the east by some of his own officers. And some reasons here, it didn't come out of nowhere. His officers had gotten worried by his increasing paranoia. And again, anytime an emperor becomes paranoid, we've seen it happen several times, you're always worried for, are you going to be next? Is the emperor going to come for you next? They were also disgruntled by his endless campaigns in some desert conditions. They had been fighting mostly in the east, and it just seemed like Caracalla was never going to be done with these wars fighting in the east, and so his army became a bit disgruntled. So Caracalla dies assassinated in 217, and if you've been paying attention, quite a few of our emperors so far have been assassinated or forced to commit suicide also. So who becomes emperor after Caracalla? Because he doesn't have a heir to pass on the kingdom to. This time period we're about to get into with the next emperor, who's called Macrinus. Pay close attention as we get into this time period, because we're about to go through a number of emperors pretty soon in quick succession, and the empire is going to be in a very topsy-turvy, just period of there's no stability, right? And pretty soon we're gonna talk about what they call the crisis of the 3rd century, and that's where Roman historians nowadays look back on this time period and just say things were really bad. So if the time of the 5 good emperors was one of the best times of Roman history, this period we're getting into pretty soon with the quick succession of emperors is one of the worst times of Roman history, because there was a lot of emperors, there was a lot of assassination, there was a lot of negativity, and it's not going to be good for the average Roman citizen. So, pay attention to that. We've had a lot of killings lately. So the next emperor was Macrinus, and he had been the one to actually lead the coup to kill Caracalla, and so he claimed power after that because he was the one to kill Caracalla, and his troops supported him at least for a while after that. He was an equestrian. He had been praetorian prefect before, but he had never been a senator. And in fact, that made him the first emperor to become emperor without previously being a senator, to be a member of the Senate. So it shows you how things are changing a little bit in Rome as far as your status, and you could become emperor without being a senator. He adopted the family name Severus due to the Severum family's popularity, which is interesting because he had just killed Septimius Severus's son, Caracalla. But again, sometimes they would do this to kind of, we take for granted how much we know about things nowadays, because if you want to know about our president, you can Google him and look up all this information about him, right? But a lot of people just hear little bits and pieces about the emperor. There's no newspapers and stuff like that. So, but if you hear this guy's name has Severus in it, that really might influence you in some way and say, hey, this guy respects Severus, or he was at least connected to him somehow, and that really might influence you. So it seems silly nowadays, like if someone just took the name of the last president, it would seem kind of bizarre. But at the time period, people knew much less about their leaders, and this might have a PR effect on people. Okay. Now, even though the troops support him at first, they didn't support him for long. He caused outrage with his troops when he negotiated kind of a quick peace with the Parthians, and this was seen as he had kind of surrendered almost and given up, and that he was buying out, basically paying his way out of this jam with the Parthians, and that was not popular. Probably even more deadly was he reduced the army pay. Now, this is probably for a good reason. It was probably because army pay had gotten a bit out of control because of the last few emperors, but still going to be a very unpopular decision if you're one of those soldiers. And so he did not follow that rule about supporting your soldiers. So the troops were eventually dissatisfied with Macrinus's decisions, and they proclaimed one of the grandsons, I should say supposed grandson of Caracalla to be emperor, who was only 14 at the time. Okay, I say that because we don't have confirmation of that. So after that, it was kind of seen as Macrinus was not legitimate anymore. Macrinus and his son were killed by those same troops who had recently been with him and helped him kill Caracalla. So sometimes it doesn't work out when you stage a coup against an emperor like this. And the next emperor is that young boy, and we're going to see about him tomorrow. But I want to hold off on him because he is one of the kind of the more, interesting, kind of weird emperors in Roman history. So I want to spend just a little more time talking about him. So we'll stop there with Macrinus today, and tomorrow we will talk about the young man who takes over after Macrinus. Okay, tomorrow should actually be. I'm saying tomorrow. This won't be till next week. Excuse me. But next time should be our time to finish up this chapter. This chapter's not too long, so we should be able to finish it all up next time, okay? Hope you guys have an excellent weekend. Thank you guys for following along with your notes and everything. Make sure to keep up with it, and I'll see you guys again on Monday. Walete.